So I'm introducing myself to Julie, and probably I should introduce Julie to you guys now. So I'm Reem Almasri, and very excited to be here right now, and with Julie Owono. Julie is one of the 20 members of the Facebook Oversight Board, and she's the Executive Director of the Content Policy and Society Lab, and a fellow of the Program on Democracy and the Internet at Stanford University. She's also the Executive Director of the digital rights organization Internet Sans Frontières, and an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. She holds a master's degree in international law from La Sorbonne University in Paris and practiced as a lawyer at the Paris Bar. And I'm Reem Almasri. I'm a journalist at the Jordan-based media organization Hibr. I'm very excited about this conversation with Julie, especially after it has been a year almost since the board has officially started working in October 2020. And Mark Zuckerberg had dubbed the board as Facebook Supreme Court, where the board can make binding decisions to uphold or reverse Facebook and Instagram content moderation decisions. The most famous decision of the board was the decision to uphold Facebook's decision to restrict the access of Donald Trump to posting on the platform, dubbed by deplatforming. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Reem, and I'm so glad to be here and discuss with you.
We're very happy for you to be here as well. And while this conversation is with Julie, I would like to extend an invitation to everyone with us in the room to post your questions, and maybe we can have several breaks to address them. I want to start by saying that we are very lucky to conduct this conversation right after the release of the first quarterly report published by the Oversight Board on November 8th. And according to the board, according to the report, the board mentions that it received around 500,000 appeal cases between December 2021 and December was it? Yeah, December 2021 until October. December 2020 until October 2021. And from these 500,000 cases, the board selected 21 cases to review and ultimately proceeded with 17 of these. By the end of June, the board has decided that 11 cases will overturn Facebook decisions has decided 11 cases, overturning Facebook decisions 8 times and upholding it 3 times. And my first question to you is, although the report mentions that only 4% of the 500,000 appeals came from the Middle East and North Africa, and the board also acknowledges that these percentages do not reflect the distribution of content moderation, violation, and if anything, and I quote from the report, we have reason to believe that users in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East experience more, not fewer problem with Facebook than parts of the world with more appeals. Wondering, how do you explain this disparity and what evidence did the board have that made it reach this conclusion?
Thank you very much, Reem. Yes, this is an area that we're watching very closely at the Oversight Board. Your question was what could explain why only a few percentage of cases are coming from the Middle East, business also from Sub-Saharan Africa and other places. Well, I think it's the board will continue to improve its engagement opportunities in those regions. We have held several, we call it open hours, open office hours, in which we allow anyone from interested organizations in the region or interested activists to, well, first of all, discuss the moderation challenges in their region, and also deepen the the channel of communication that might exist with the Oversight Board. So we've held one, which I was part of. Well, we've held several, and I was part of one that concerned West and Central Africa. Now, to your second question, wondering what evidence we had. Well, first of all, the board is very global in its nature. As you know, we are 20 members, 20 people from different parts of the world. I have colleagues in Taiwan, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and London, and so many other places. And many of the members have a very deep knowledge of content moderation, resource challenges in global South countries, what we call global South. I increasingly like to use global majority. There are other terms out there, but yeah, let's stick to, well, global majority for now. And so even though these countries do not make, are not represented fairly in the number of cases that we've had, we nevertheless are very aware of the situation, of the grim situation when it comes to content policies and content moderation in those regions. We've recently received a case related to the conflict in Ethiopia, which has made the headlines for the past few weeks, and for the wrong reasons, unfortunately. But this was also evidence in our case decisions, and also reflected in the recommendations that we made to Facebook. The evidence with regards to the content moderation challenges. And we, for instance, recommended to Facebook, Meta now, to review its content moderation in Arabic and Hebrew as part of another very important decision that we made, Al Jazeera decision. In the case that involved content from a news outlet in India, we're told that community standards should be translated in Punjabi. Punjabi is a language spoken by, I think, more than 30 million people. It was not understandable that this language was not available for community standards. And last but not least, in the case regarding the former President Trump, which you mentioned, we noted the parallels in attention given to political speech elsewhere in the world, where, for instance, we know that there was not necessarily the same energy in enforcing the community standards in the United States compared to some other places around the world. So our cases are global in nature. It is clear that the rules themselves are not as accessible to everyone as we would like to, but it's really something that we're at the board working hard to help Facebook tackle more. I mentioned the Punjabi case. And at the same time, we're working to actively encourage people from across the globe to appeal and to engage with the public comment process, which allows, at each case that we receive, allows the public, allows organizations to, well, guide the board with regards to how it should make a decision in a specific case.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for this, Julie. And I want to move on to the next question, which is also asked by one of our listeners. So Gus is very surprised that there are 500,000 appeal cases and the board only took 17. So he's saying, did I hear those numbers correctly? Can we talk about the ways cases are taken? And maybe we can start with the Al Jazeera case to walk through the criteria through which cases are taken. Although 4% of these 500,000 seem little, but these are like 20,000 cases almost from the Middle East. And I'm wondering if you can walk us through the criteria of selecting the Al Jazeera case from these 20,000 cases that you guys have received. Yes. And just a reminder, maybe you can remind our audience with the decision that Facebook has taken on Al Jazeera case, just like a quick review on what was it?
Yes, sure. Well, thank you very much, Gus, for your question. So first of all, there's a lot to respond to here. So I'll probably start with the Al Jazeera case. So as a reminder, this was a publication shared. So Al Jazeera, the Arabic version of the international news channel, on its Facebook page, shared a report of direct threats made by the Al-Qassam Brigade in the frame of the conflict with the Israeli army earlier this year. And so the publication was quoting, I think, a general from the brigade. What is important to know is that the brigade is forbidden on Facebook. It's considered a dangerous organization, and dangerous organization, you cannot praise them. That's the bottom line. So Al Jazeera, a news network, shared the publication as it was. The publication was not taken down by Facebook. And then a Facebook user located in Egypt reshared the post, and with a comment that just said, "Oh," so a comment written in Arabic. And so that publication by the Egyptian user was taken down for violating the dangerous organization's policy, which, again, as I said, prevents people from praising organizations that are not allowed or individuals that are not allowed on the platform. So why did we select this case? Well, we selected, like we all select all cases, we're thinking about the kind of precedent our decision might create and how much the community standards might positively be impacted by the changes through the recommendations that we make based on the case we're working on. And what's interesting is that the recommendations that we make on the community standards do not only apply to the case, but also to all Facebook users. So they have potentially they have the potential, I should rather say, they have the potential of probably decreasing the risk for a user to violate the same community standard if we make it more clear, if we make it more transparent, and so many other elements. So the cases we've selected so far are significant on the global perspective and have an impact on many users. I said that they also raise questions about Facebook's policies. That's another very important aspect in our decision to choose one case compared to another. And also very important, ask real important question as to where to draw the line between content which is public interest, but also which present risks for the public. How do we balance safety with freedom of expression? This very often comes. And the cases that we've chosen have included, of course, the Al Jazeera case, but also have included, conflict COVID-19. Are you allowed to criticize COVID-19 measures? Are you, and in a conflict, how are community standards of Facebook applied in a situation where there's an anti-armed conflict? And I was mentioning the dangerous individuals and organizations would have made quite a high number of the cases that we've worked on, because I hadn't realized until I was on the board that this was a very contentious aspect of the community standards of Facebook. So in the specific Al Jazeera case, we were aware of the deeply troubling scenes of violence that occurred during the conflict in the Israel and Palestinian territories last spring. And we wanted to select the case that had the potential, and that's what we always do, the potential to probe questions that people were raising at the time. First of all, one example is, can we question the alleged internet unit that exists within the Israeli government that allegedly, works with Facebook to, suggest content that should be taken down out of the, content that does not necessarily violate an Israeli law. So can we have more transparency in that? The board recommended that the company, that Facebook and Meta in general, be more transparent on, the moderation processes, basically working with government agencies that do not base their requests on legal obligations. And in this case, I should say the Oversight Board overturned the original Facebook decision to remove the content shared by the Egyptian user. And we concluded that by removing the user's content, it did not reduce offline harm at all. I mean, the original publication by Al Jazeera was still available. Why delete a public interest publication with a comment that frankly is not insightful? I mean, you could say a lot about but I'm not sure we can say it's a call for violence, for instance. So yes, these are some of the elements that have guided discussions to select this case, and also discussion to overturn the decision of the Facebook company.
I have more questions regarding the Al Jazeera case, especially with the questions that the board asked Facebook, but Facebook didn't provide information on. So, for example, the board has asked Facebook whether they've received any government-derived request to remove content, and Facebook refused to answer this question. How do you read such refusal, and does it undermine the work of the board? This refusal of answers, does it undermine the work of the board?
I would say that on the contrary, it's precisely where the company refuses to respond that the board is very aware that this is potentially something important. For instance, we asked, we did ask the company whether it could give information with regards to requests received from government entities, officials, about taking down content. In the case in the Al Jazeera case, the company refused to respond. Well, we made a recommendation, and what's interesting with recommendations is that the company has publicly to respond and to explain why it will. So the company has 3 ways to respond. It will fully implement the recommendation, it will partly implement it, or it will not implement it. And in any cases, the company has to justify the response. So it's interesting, even in the silences of Meta, we actually learn so much, and we have much more room for action, and particularly for recommendation. And one very interesting example, which is very in the news, is the cross-check program. As a reminder, it's a program which through which the company does not apply with the same strength, I would say, the community standards to some very important people. We were led to think, we asked question about this exception to the application of community standards to the company, and we were kind of led to assume it was the program only concerned a few thousands of accounts. But later, what was interesting is that we, thanks to our questions and thanks to our recommendations, we put the cross-check program in a more public eye. Before the Trump decision, unless you were a journalist who really had interest in searching for this information, as a general user, you would know about the cross-check program. There were very little chances. Well, thanks to the decision and the questions that we asked within the Trump decision process, we were able to put this program in the spotlight. And what followed is extremely interesting. There were investigations. There was whistleblowing, first of all, that precisely led to, showing that Facebook was not upfront with the Oversight board, which I think placed the company in a very, very delicate position. And yes, it forced, it invited many more investigations. And as we're talking now, the cross-check program is on our desks for the Oversight board through a request from the company, from Meta, a request to, help it review this program and make it more human rights respectful by design.
Thanks for explaining this, Julie. I want to go back to a point where you made about the definitions of dangerous individuals and organizations policy in Facebook. And I'm sure that part of the appeals that the board has received from the Middle East area, especially around the months from in April, June, and July, where there was this escalation of the Israeli occupation forces against the Palestinians, many of these appeals related to dangerous individuals and organizations, especially that so many, there's a civil rights organization called Hamle. In their report, they mentioned that around hundreds of content were removed, or at least 250 pieces of content related to Palestine and Save Sheikh Jarrah campaign were removed from Facebook. And the reported cases are only the tip of the iceberg. Maybe these cases were not appealed to the board, but this is something that was documented by Hamle. And also, there has been leaks, recent leaks, whether in the past 2 years or just like very recently. Sorry, I'm gonna get to the leaks. On structural issues that has to do with content moderation in Arabic. For example, in 2019, the NYT or New York Times published a policy document published a leaked policy document that through which Facebook considered the word martyr, shaheed, a terrorist. And The Intercept also published another leaked policy document that treated anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. And also, just maybe a month ago, in October, after the Al Jazeera appeal, The Intercept has also published a leak that shows the list of the most dangerous individuals and organizations, and most of them were Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Muslim. And they made the conclusion that they also align with like the American foreign policy interests. So I'm wondering, like, given this this big dramatic changes in definitions between what is terrorism and what is anti-Semitism, how does the board take the local context into consideration when you deal with these cases?
Thank you very much. These are extremely important questions that I have to say come up very often when we deliberate. So there are several ways to take into account local context. The first one is one process that I would really urge anyone interested to participate in is through public comments and other engagement opportunities with the Oversight Board. Public comments, again, are a period after each case selection that allows organizations and individuals who have an interest to guide the board on the decision it's going to make. The second type of engagement is also through, so I did not specify, so the Facebook Oversight Board makes binding decision on specific cases, but also receives policy advisory opinion request from the company, from Meta. So I was mentioning the cross-check program. Meta has asked us to help them rewrite the privacy advice, the policy, its policy on cross-check program. So even when we receive policy advisory requests from the company, we engage with organizations, we commission research to help the board better inform its work in the specific requests received from the company. So with that being said, there are other ways to not only take into account the context, but also to place the case beyond the borders where it's located. So you were mentioning the fact that some words are considered terrorism or anti-Semitism when actually they are, tools for activists to sometimes to make their case on very unjust situations. Well,
and they're part of the let's say the cultural language of how people express these incidents. So
absolutely. So that's why the board does not make its decision based on local laws or based on local interpretations. We base our decision on international human rights law principles, standards, which state that the principle, Article 19, which many of you are aware here of the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights. Well, Article 19 says the principle is freedom of expression. The exception have to be clearly and strictly defined. That is our only analysis, honestly, when we make a decision. Are the community standards allowing for expression by principle? And what are the exceptions strictly defined, clearly defined, accessibly defined, so that the user can understand, that make an exception, a restriction to the free expression, a viable solution in this particular case? This is always what guides our analysis. Is the exception legal? Is the exception proportionate? was the exception necessary to attain whatever aim the company wanted to achieve here? So yes, these are questions that guide the board. And if you read our decisions, they're structured always the same. We analyze the community standards, then we confront the case and the community standards with international human rights law and standards. That's what allow us to go beyond, to take into account the specific, the context, the necessary information that support the safeguarding of freedom of expression, and then we confront all that with the exception. So in principle, freedom of expression should be preserved. So we take into account the context, the cultural context particularly, and the important knowledge that is brought by organizations, individuals who have this knowledge, this cultural and contextual knowledge. And then we confront this to, well, in what case there should be an exception. And we try to see whether or not the exception here was legal, was proportionate, and was necessary to achieve the aim that the company wanted to achieve. And it's only under these three conditions that will uphold or not uphold a decision made by the company Meta.
Right. I'm finding it hard to call it Meta yet, but maybe
Facebook, if you will. It's just that I have to say we receive cases from Facebook, but it was and it's still very difficult, to dissociate Instagram, Facebook, the social network, and Facebook, the company, because there are some subtleties that I wasn't that much aware of before, but so yeah.
I'm going to go to some of the questions that we received while you were speaking, but I feel like I hope that because they were posted while you're speaking, but I'm not sure on which part. So Anwar is asking, how does this align with Zuckerberg's statement that this is the Supreme Court of Facebook? And I think, but maybe Anwar can explain more if I got it wrong. I think he's referring to how these cases, the point that you mentioned on how these decisions that you make eventually set a precedence or could possibly set a precedence for how Facebook could treat future cases. Mm-hmm. So maybe your authority or your binding decisions are only on specific cases, but is it also on future cases that are similar? So how do you ensure that these cases will actually be taken as a precedence in the future, since you only take 17 cases out of 500 to look into, and it's of course impossible to look into all of these cases?
Very important question, Anwar, and thank you so much, Reem, for helping me, narrow my response. To do that, to ensure that the decisions that we make really set a precedent and really impact more users than the one case that was submitted to us. Well, we have established an implementation working group. This is very recent. This was not in the bylaws of the Oversight Board. This was not in the charter, but we just thought, and I think that speaks to the agility of the board. Many people, of course, complain that we received 500,000 cases between December 2020 and October 2021, and we only took 17. I understand it is frustrating, but if you look beyond the numbers, and if you look at the impact that we're making on the policies themselves, on the way, the company has to justify itself in the public eye now compared to before, I think we're in an interesting stage. The implementation working group was set up by the board specifically for that. First of all, to track the responses to our recommendations that the company publishes, like I said, a month after we issue the recommendations. And not only do we track how the company implements the recommendation, but we also track how the company implements. So in a specific case, as I said, that's the really binding part of the decision. Now, there are several other cases that look exactly the same. And that are, the company's right now, as we're talking, working on on mechanisms that the board is tracking that the board in its implementation working group is keeping a track on. Well, the company is trying to implement a methodology to make sure that similar cases will not receive, we receive the same response that was given by the board in a decision on a specific case. So yes, it's a work in progress, and it speaks to the amount of work that is left to be done. I'm very, I don't want to say satisfied, but I'm very encouraged by the work that we have done in a year. I had not realized that we had worked so hard, but we did, because we were really in the middle of launching, and at the same time taking casing, making sure we're making the right decisions, and also making sure that we have clear decisions. I mean, all of this takes time and work. And I'm very encouraged that we did not shy away, as many were fearing. We did not shy away from asking hard questions, including on elements that were not by definition in our bylaws. We have changed those bylaws to reflect, again, the agility and the necessary changes that you have to make when operating and when discovering the daunting task that is ahead of us. And yes, I'm encouraged, and I really look forward to what we're going to do in the next quarters, because we have learned so much from the previous ones. We know where the blind spots are, and we're putting a lot of energy, and I insist on that. And I am particularly interested in making sure that the board does that. I'm making sure that we will not only look at Northern America and Europe, because that does not necessarily reflect the reality of the user base of Facebook and Instagram, but we will continue to look beyond those two. And actually, my theory, that's not the board's theory, but my theory, having been the executive director of an organization that has an eye on a foot in the global majority, global south, and in the global north, or global minority in number, we know that a lot of bad things that happen in those places where usually we don't pay attention to, well, these are the exact same threats that are coming tenfold to more stable democracies. And so I really hope that the Oversight Board can continue to keep an eye and deepen its engagement, deepen its presence, deepen the knowledge about the work that we do in those regions.
Thank you so much, Julie. And for sure, like, no one can deny the work that you guys are putting into bringing accountability to Facebook, especially in relation and in proportion to the amount of mistrust that people are having in Facebook and its policy. So probably you're also under test from people to see like how much you can hold Facebook accountable as well, and because it's the first time that Facebook does this kind of governance, and the authority that you're given was not expected, to be honest. I want to go back. I'm sorry. I feel like I asked Anwar's question. He actually followed up saying that his, although the question that I asked is something that I had among my questions, but what he was referring to, with how does this align with Zuckerberg's statement that this is the Supreme Court of Facebook, was regarding Facebook declining requests for information. Especially the ones that you guys post to Facebook. So can you talk a little bit about how does the board look at Facebook's decline for information, and recommendations as well, the recommendations that you're giving?
So first of all, I wanted to make it extremely clear: we do not care what Mark Zuckerberg says. He says what he has to say. We do our job, which is holding his company accountable and making it more transparent. That's one thing. The second thing is, so how do we take the fact that the company declines? Well, honestly, this is not our responsibility, to each his own. Our responsibility is to hold the company accountable. If the company does not want to answer, it's a form of accountability. And the examples that I've shown tend to prove it. If you refuse to respond, that's exactly what people are going to look into. And that is completely normal. And it's actually more helpful for the company to be, well, it's more helpful. And that's what we try to tell them. It's more helpful for them if they really want to create this environment where we can advance towards clearer rules, towards more accountable company, well, that's more beneficial for the company than appearing as a company which is trying to defy its own, its own commitments. In 21st century, we don't want companies that lie anymore. Nobody is interested. So again, it's the company's responsibility if it wants to tell half the truth or not be fully upfront. That's their responsibility and problem. Our responsibility as the Oversight Board is to not shy away from asking those hard questions and put them in the public. And that's what we do and that we will continue to do.
Thank you, Julie. One question that also arose from Gus was, how can we increase the number of regional cases the board sees and responds to? And I'm assuming he's referring to the Middle East as well.
So how to increase the number of cases received? Well, sorry, I'm trying to think. First of all, please submit cases. Engage with the board. And you might think that this is trivial. It is not. There is, to tell you how internally it works, there is a case selection committee, which is composed of Oversight Board members. And those Oversight Board members, each board member will sit at the case selection committee. And these Oversight Board members are not isolated. We're almost all, I think, on social media. I have very close links with organizations, including SMEX. I've worked with SMEX on internet shutdowns for the past at least 5 years. So we are not isolated, and we discuss internally, and we also discuss with whoever is sitting on the case selection committee. So it doesn't mean that every single case that will be submitted from the region is going to be taken by the board. No, but what I want, the reality is that if we don't receive as many cases, if I don't remember the figures, I think it's more than 40% of the cases that we receive out of the 500,000 are from Northern America, but there are more chances that one of the cases we'll work on will be located in this part of the world. So I'm not saying this is a competition for numbers, but I'm just saying it's really the right time to engage with the Oversight Board to better understand, and also for us to make our work better understood by the public beyond Northern America. I wish there were the tones of articles that I've read following the Trump decision in the United States. I really wish there were the same type after, well, we're going to have a decision soon involving a conflict, an active conflict in Ethiopia. I really hope that this decision is going to make the headlines. I really wish the Al Jazeera decision made even more headlines. It did make headlines, thankfully. And I wish it would even more continue to make headlines, because what we have tried to highlight there, based on recommendations from civil society organizations. We've read the reports that you've mentioned by Hamé and by other organizations which contributed. And it's thanks to these recommendations and these reports that we were aware of things. I didn't know that there was an internet unit, for instance. So yes, please, let's continue to engage with one another. And please trust that whatever that you put in the hands of the Oversight Board, if not every single member will read it, at least we will have a briefing on it, we will discuss it, and it will be factored into the decisions that we make if it's relevant and if it's really helpful and impactful. So yes.
I have another question regarding the Al Jazeera case as well. One of the things that it revealed was on its policy for, just a second, I'm trying to read the part. Yeah, so one very alarming issue that this case revealed was the structural problems of Arabic content moderation on Facebook. The content was first reviewed and rated by a moderator in North Africa, and then it was re-reviewed by another moderator based in Southeast Asia, following the user's objection. So the second reviewer did not speak Arabic and had access only to automated translation of content. And this is evident of like very structural issues with content moderation that starts with like the very least minimum requirements of having Arabic speakers reviewing the Arabic content. And I'm wondering, like, when would the board feel that they've done a success or they've achieved something regarding solving these structural issues in content moderation? Like, what would make you feel that you've actually contributed to these structural, or not contributed, but improved these structural issues in Facebook? When will you be happy about what you've done, let's say?
So, first of all, I'm already encouraged again by the very fact that we talk about these mishappenings and these very serious structural problems. That when you're in a position being a civil society, having an external eye, well, you suspect there are problems because we all, you know, have seen that things that should be taken down are not taken down, and things that shouldn't have been taken down are taken down in a more disproportionate way than probably in Europe or in Northern America, where the same moderation challenges are, where these moderation challenges are not the same. So it's one thing to have an intuition this exists. It's one thing to measure from an external perspective. It's different when the company puts it black and white on the paper. For instance, it's very interesting that a content would be moderated by someone who doesn't speak the language. We've been saying that for years, but now we know it happens, and especially in the COVID time, allegedly the company had reorganization problems. But also worse than that, there seems to be miscommunications internally between the teams. In the Ochalan case, we were extremely shocked that, well, there was one policy. So as you know, again, the dangerous organizations and individuals policy prevents users from praising. I don't want to say talk about dangerous organization. Let's focus on praising. The principle is not praising. But an exception was added, I think, in 2018, saying that to denounce the human rights violations of that individual or of that organization, it would be possible to talk about it. And in that case, it was a user who was complaining about the solitary confinement of Abdullah Öcalan, solitary confinement which had been criticized by the UN and so many other international organizations and human rights organizations. So Facebook had the exception internally. It just got lost. So yeah, it's very different when you see that on the paper and when you confront the company to its own shortcomings, when the company wants to, appear as, I understand, I am sure there's certainly lots of efforts made by individual working there, but there are structural problems that make it possible for such an important policy to get it lost into a translation. So I would say I'm encouraged by this work, by the fact that we're opening the black box, the content moderation black box. But now, when will it be a success? It will be a success when, I don't know, when in the transparency reportings or also on the Transparency Center in the recommendation section. So there is a section on the Transparency Center that was created by the Facebook, there is a section about the Oversight Board, and particularly the recommendations that we make and how the company has responded to them. I would be encouraged to see, on recommendations related to moderation processes and language capabilities, the company will be able to report in, I don't know, the amount of time they said they would implement it. We'll be able to report that, hey, we've made some good progress here. We've translated all our community standards and all our implementation guidelines for our content moderators. We've made sure to liaise with content moderators to make sure that the policies that we want to adopt here is going to be actually implementable. There are lots of measures of success, and it's also something that the implementation working group is actively working on. But yes, success for me, would be that the implementation working group is able to track a successful delivery and achievement by the company when it comes to content moderation processes.
Thank you for this, Julie. There has been like side conversations and Q&A on the chat box as well. So people asking questions and answering and getting their answers on the chat box. So one person asked about the time frame of submitting a case and getting it heard, and someone answered it's days, right? Or would you like to answer?
No, yes, I would like to answer. So from the moment when you submit the case till the moment when, so imagine your case is selected. I'll talk about cases selected. So from the moment your case is selected to the moment that the Oversight Board makes a decision, a final decision, it's 90 days. You will say that it's long, but actually there's so much happening between those 90 days. So first of all, there has to be a legal review, because the Oversight Board does not make decisions on elements that entail legal obligations on the company. So typically, anything that relates to terrorism, terrorist content, alleged terrorist content, we would not be able to look at it, because most countries in the world have laws against terrorism and terrorism online. So that's one thing. And also the legal review also entails questions with regards to privacy. Is there anything in this particular case and publication that could violate someone's privacy? The problem becomes even more important for cases that are referred to us for content that was left up. So if you as an individual see something that you think should not be on the platform, you can appeal to the board, but it's not your content. So we really have to make sure that the original poster, well, not violating their privacy unnecessarily. So all this has to take some time. And then after the legal review and the privacy review have happened, the Oversight Board, also legal team, make sure that we can actually take the case and, you know, that's it from a legal perspective. And once all this vetting has been done, we can start the panel can start deliberating on the case. As a reminder, we're 20, but we're not working all on the same cases, although we make decisions on all the cases. But those who will actually look deeply into the case are in a panel of 5 board members. And those are the ones who unpack the case and deliberate on it before submitting to the rest of the board for a collective collegial decision. And so, yes, all of this can take up to 90 days. What is interesting is we do surface a lot of enforcement errors. And that's something that I think we should insist more. We actually help lots of content being republished, even before 90 days, even not without having to take over the case. And when that happens, we've obtained from the company that the company lets the user know that the content was allowed to be back on, that the company made an error, and the error was surfaced thanks to the work with the Oversight Board, and therefore the content will be back up. So these can take way less. But the principle is that we have 90 days to make a decision, 30 days in case of emergency, or even a week in case of very serious risks for security, for life, and other important human rights. Yes.
Thank you so much, Julie. You've been very generous with your answers, but because you're generous with your answers, so many other questions are coming in. And one of which is for Ellery. Hi, Ellery. And Ellery is asking that many board recommendations have implications both for Facebook policies and for the technology algorithms. Are you able to ensure that board decisions are implemented at the technical level? And does the company offer any evidence for that?
So 2 things on that. Yes, we do have a way to ensure. We don't have a police, so it's always, voluntary, but we do have a way to ensure that the technical teams are aware of the recommendations. And for that, we do have conversations with policy teams at the company level, with product teams, with data scientists, with integrity, with I've discovered so many teams on Facebook since I've been on the board. So yes, we do speak with the technical community within the company and make sure that they're up to date on every recommendation that we make, and we ensure that they provide us with responses, and we also based on the responses that the company gave us to our recommendations, we just keep track. We say, if for instance the company said we'll implement this in 15 days fully, well, in 15 days we'll be back and asking, okay, show us the results. So we do that. There's a very frequent back and forth between the implementation working group, the board in general, but specifically the implementation working group, which is a group composed of board members, but also we have hired a former data scientist who has worked with companies and who is aware of how to measure technically the implementation of a policy. So that expertise is extremely important to us. And yes, we're making sure that we'll also have that expertise in-house. So yeah, we do have ways to measure whether or not the company is lying to us, because internally we have people who speak that language, that specific language. And thank you, Ellery, sorry for your question. So great to see you here.
Thank you, Julie. I want to go to a campaign that started yesterday, upon which, because Facebook has removed or restricted the pages of two media organizations that have been reporting from Palestine, reporting on the escalations of the Israeli forces against Palestinians in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Mm-hmm. And the campaign was Facebook restricts Jerusalem, or Al-Quds, I think. And I'm wondering, like, even though that maybe these media organizations did not reach for the Oversight Board or file a complaint, but there is evidence that Facebook is removing their pages. And I'm wondering, how could the Oversight Board support activists or journalists and civil society organizations that are already working on such campaigns and or have been wrongfully silenced by Facebook? Especially that there is a lot of growing evidence through leaked documents or like through the Oversight Board decisions as well on structural problems. So is there any way the Oversight Board, or is there any plan for the Oversight Board to outreach to these organizations, even though there hasn't been any appeal process, maybe through public consultations or through helping them in submitting cases and engaging them?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to reiterate that any report that exists is under the radar of the Oversight Board. And we do not, we seize every opportunity that we can to make sure that those recommendations are reflected, those reports and activism and advocacy, awareness raising advocacy, is reflected in the recommendations that we make. I'm an activist myself. I know how important it is to make sure that, I don't want to say your work, but the problems that you're trying to highlight are understood by institutions that have a broader reach, such as the Oversight Board. Well, yes, we do not shy away from taking on these recommendations and including them in the decisions that we make and in the recommendations that we make. That's one thing. The other thing, when it comes to the specifics of the campaign that you're mentioning, well, we have one of our recommendation to the company in the Al Jazeera case was that the company audits potential bias in its moderation in Israel and Palestine. That's something that we've asked. If you ask me exactly what the company responded, I have a blank here, and I apologize for that. But it's on the Transparency Center, and it's also on the Oversight Board website. I'm sorry, it's 7 a.m. here, and I have a blank here, but I'll probably remember it later on. But just to say that it's a recommendation that we've made, and the company has responded to it. So
it's DSR, by the way, I just looked it up.
Yeah, it's what?
DSR. I have.
Oh, yes, right. Okay, so they've committed to implement the recommendation, which is extremely encouraging, and I really look forward to seeing the result of that audit. So yes, we are really open and really willing to engage with organizations in the region working on this matter to make sure that we are aware of the moderation challenges, and we're engaged through several means. I mentioned the public comments. I also would like to mention the regional open office hours that we organize. I'm not sure when the next one related to the Middle East and Northern Africa region will be, but it's definitely something we can work on, and then would encourage to Smax or anyone here to reach out to our engagement team. Extremely wonderful, great team. And yes, we it's a work in progress, and like I said, it's a priority because Middle East is a blind spot and it shouldn't be. So yes, there will be opportunities in the future, in the near future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie, for this very rich and generous conversation. I've been nagged to pay attention to the time because I think the speakers of the next panel has arrived as well. Okay. But also, I think we've answered most of the questions. I think we're really lucky to have you, especially after the first quarterly report has came out, to explain some of the data that came in it.
Sorry.
If you have like any last comments before we leave.
Yes, there is one very important thing that I may not have mentioned is again, would like to stress on the public comments, and also we currently have the cross-check program, which is sitting, as I said, on the Facebook Oversight board. So there was a request from the company for the board to help review it. So there will be engagement opportunities that as well. If there are views that you think are important to convey, things that we are not aware of, the negative impacts or the positive impacts of cross-check in the Middle East region, we tend to be open. Yes, there will be opportunities. So please keep in touch and stay on the lookout on the website for opportunities to engage on that. And yes, once again, we have a wonderful public policy and engagement team. So yes, they're really keen on making sure we have more interactions with every regions where Facebook is operating, Facebook and Instagram are operating and have users. And I really thank the Smax team for the invitation today. And yes, looking forward to future engagements.
Well, I can assure you that you'll definitely be contacted, and your work the board work will be a lot under scrutiny now. So good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Max. And thanks, everyone, for being with us.